Good morning. My name is Gianna Jessen, and I would like to thank you so much for the opportunity to testify here today. My biological mother was 7.5 months pregnant when she went to a Planned Parenthood and was advised, they advised her to have a late-term saline abortion. This method of abortion burns the baby inside and out, blinding and suffocating the child, who is then born dead, usually within 24 hours. And there should be a photo there. Yes, this is what I survived. Instead of dying, after 18 hours of being burned in my mother's womb, I was delivered alive in an abortion clinic in Los Angeles on April the 6th, 1977. You can see a photo as well of my medical records. My medical records state, born alive during saline abortion, 6 a.m. Ha! Victory. Thankfully, the abortionist was not at work yet. Had he been there, he would have ended my life with strangulation, suffocation, or leaving me there to die. Instead, a nurse called an ambulance.
This is part 3, Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood.
What are we talking about when we say a right to choose? What do we mean by that?
When you say I have a right to choose, a woman has a right to choose, that's just a fog, that's a cover, that's not a truth, that's not a true argument. You know, let's say in football, defense and offense has to stay on their side on the line of scrimmage until the ball is snapped. Until you hear hut hut and the ball is snapped, you stay on your side, I stay on my side, right? Let's say that one of the offensive linemen say, you know what, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't suit me. I don't feel that works for me. And so I feel like I ought to be able to step across the line of scrimmage and come back because that's better for me, right? And then we say, well, the offensive lineman has a right to choose. That's not a right to choose. That's changing the whole game. That's saying there's no such thing as line of scrimmage. So if he can step, then maybe the center can step. Why not the offensive tackle? They can step across. Well, why don't the quarterback step? Why don't there just not be a line of scrimmage at all? You see, that's how we sound. So to say right to choose is just deflection. It's like a keto or something. It's just deflecting the argument. The argument is it murder or is it not? And for me to even ask the question, you could probably guess like what side I'm on. But still, I like to look at it. I try hard to look at it from the person who holds the opposite view. In fact, I go out of my way to test my views against people who see it differently. So you might say, this is really barbaric. You're talking about burning unborn children with saline solution in the womb. You're talking about sucking them apart limb from limb. You're talking about decapitating. You're talking even if they're partially sticking out of the womb, you can still tear them up. That seems real barbaric. That don't sound right. Well, that's because in the inception, abortion was not meant for everyone. Abortion was started by Margaret Sanger, and it was later changed to Planned Parenthood, but it was originally meant with eugenics, racial hygiene, to where the upper classes were afraid that the lower classes would reproduce quicker and faster under harsh conditions. And they're morons, and this is her words, they're morons producing more morons, and if we keep this up, there won't be no more upper classes.
Social Darwinism had justified genocidal policies in the colonies, and in the same years it also fueled new fears amongst the British elite, fears of other dangerous races living in their midst, the working classes of their own cities.
Race and class are actually very close to each other. If you look at books about race around Darwin's time, they often talk about the Cockney race, the English country race, the Scottish race. There were drawings of the head of a typical member of the Cockney race, and the word was used quite seriously. There were maps made of where the criminal races lived. These were the rookeries. This was the East End, the melting pot of all the horrors that were going to go out and infect the rest of the population.
Race scientists and social reformers visited prisons to study the criminal races at first hand, and among them was Charles Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton. Galton was terrified by the fact that the underclass were reproducing faster than the middle classes. Darwinian law had, it seemed, been turned on its head. The least fit were surviving. Reversing this situation became his mission.
Darwin had looked backwards. Where had we come from? Galton turned the telescope around and looked forward. Where were we going? And he devoted much of the rest of his life to the idea of understanding Homo sapiens, us, as a species, and trying to direct where Homo sapiens was going to go in order to become more sapient, more wise in the future, more of a genius, and less of what he saw, more stupid, more ignorant, and more decayed.
Galton designed a new science of human selective breeding. He dreamed of encouraging the middle classes to have more children and inhibiting breeding amongst the lower and criminal classes. And he named his new science eugenics. In the last decades of the 19th century, it became widely respected, attracting an array of high-profile supporters. Marriage laws.
They included
and the eugenicists spread their message using the new medium of cinema. The propaganda was intended to protect the genetic health of the white race. This would be achieved by eradicating those deemed unworthy through forced mass sterilization.
They went about methodically tracking ancestry and targeting bloodlines for extinction. That's eugenics, the effort to create a white, master, blonde, blue-eyed master race by wiping out other bloodlines until they were left only with themselves and people who resembled themselves. And what's important here is that these people thought they were saving humanity. These people thought they were liberals, they were liberals, they were liberals, they were liberals, they were reformers.
Eugenics was a worldwide movement. In Sweden, an official program forcibly sterilized 60,000 people, mental patients and members of the ethnic minorities. In Britain, the Eugenic Society received widespread support from across the political spectrum. But it was in Germany that the radical ideas of the American eugenics movement found its most receptive audience.
Anything connected to America would be seen to be modern, progressive, scientific, democratic, reasonable, so it must be good. America was the future, the force of the future. Secondly, I think that many European eugenicists, including the Germans, liked the tone adopted by American eugenicists, which was very radical and sort of no-nonsense, and they didn't use euphemisms, they said exactly what they meant.
The Americans provided more than just inspiration. American foundations also bankrolled the development of German eugenics.
Birth control is not merely an individual problem. It is not merely a national question. It concerns the whole wide world, the ultimate destiny of the human race. In his last book, Mr. H.G. Wells speaks of the meaningless, aimless lives which cram this world of ours. Hordes of people who are born, who live, yet who have done absolutely nothing to advance the race one iota. Their lives are hopeless repetitions. All that they have said has been said before. All that they have done has been done better before. Such human weeds clog up the path, drain up the energies and the resources of this little earth. We must clear the way for a better world. We must cultivate our garden.
In 1922, Sanger wrote a book entitled The Pivot of Civilization. In it is a chapter called The Cruelty of Charity, where she blasts programs that provide medical and nursing facilities to slum mothers as insidiously injurious. In the same book, Sanger called for the cessation of charity, for the segregation of morons, misfits, and the maladjusted, and for the sterilization of genetically inferior races. She also argued that organized attempts to help the poor was the surest sign that our civilization has bred, is breeding, and is perpetuating defectives, delinquents, and dependents. The Birth Control Review was Sanger's official publication for the American Birth Control League, and in 1932 she outlined her plan for peace.
The main objectives of the Population Congress would be to apply a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to that grade of population whose progeny is already tainted, to give certain dysgenic groups in our population their choice of segregation or sterilization, and to apportion farmlands and homesteads for these segregated persons where they would be taught to work under competent instructors for the period of their entire lives.
Sanger's admiration for the eugenics programs of Nazi Germany were well known at the time. In 1933, the Birth Control Review published Eugenic Sterilization, an Urgent Need, by Ernst Rudin, who was Hitler's director of genetic sterilization and the founder of the Nazi Society for Racial Hygiene. In her praise for the eugenics programs in Germany, Sanger called for the implementation of such programs in the United States, specifically targeting African Americans. The following editorial was published in the 1932 issue of the Birth Control Review.
The Negro problem is one of the most complicated and important confronting America. Whatever the ultimate answer may be, such an attitude brings to light the function of birth control as a necessary agency in its solution. The present submerged condition of the Negro is due in large part to the high fertility of the race under disastrously adverse circumstances. Thus, the question arises, to what extent birth control has had a eugenic effect upon the Negro race?
If any question should remain about Sanger's racist agenda, a 1939 letter she wrote to Dr. Clarence Gamble should remove all doubt.
We should hire 3 or 4 colored ministers, preferably with social service backgrounds and with engaging personalities. The most successful educational approach to the Negro is through a religious appeal. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. And the minister is a man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members.
So you see, this is where this type of thinking came from. This is where the concept of abortion came from. It wasn't just recreational sex and party and we can't control ourselves so we'll take out the kid. It came from eugenics, which we know less about eugenics than we do the Atlantic slave trade. So in closing, I like you to look at it this way. When you talk about progressivism, that is, progressive ideology means you're going to move the bar back and back. You're going to move the bar, move. What's right and wrong today is not right and wrong tomorrow. It's whatever is expedient for you at the time, you move the bar back. So we had Darwinism, then we had social Darwinism, then we had eugenics, and then we look with amazement when someone like Hitler shows up. If you believe in evolution and you believe we're all just big bugs with big brains and the biggest bugs win, well, why wouldn't you slaughter a whole bunch of people and take what they have? And then rewrite history in such a way that you blame the people who are fighting it so you can keep going. When we degrade to the place that nothing matters except what we want at the moment, and the ends justify the means no matter what, it's going to bite us in the butt, and we're going to be sorry as a people.
We must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred.